Hello and welcome to this episode of a Clean Bill of Wealth podcast. I'm your host, Galen Nuttall, and as always, this is the spot where I interview people who are up to amazing things, supporting and enhancing the lives of physicians, especially Canadian physicians. Now, I have a quick question before we hop on over to the episode. Have you ever wanted to work with a financial planner, pay them for their advice or a plan, but not have to buy a product from them? I got good news for you. I do that. It's called fee-based planning, where you pay for a plan that answers your top questions like, should I pay off debt or invest? Am I making the most of my corporation? How should I invest inside of my corporation? What do I need to do to be on track for retirement? And much, much more. If you want to know more and are wondering if you're a good fit for fee-based planning, head on over to galenhelpsdocs.com. That's Galen helpsdocs.com. Read up more about it and book a free call where you and I will talk and see if you're a good fit for fee-based planning. And now on with the show. Welcome, everyone, to this episode of Clean Bill of Wealth podcast. I'm your host, Galen Nuttall, and today I am joined with Dr. Kiet Tran. So for those of you who don't know, Dr. Tran is a family physician and emerge physician in Toronto and the founder and host of How's My Financial Health Doc podcast and the president of the Canadian Physicians Pension Plan. So certainly someone who's up to a lot of big things, and I look very forward to having a conversation. And yeah, feel free to add anything. I'm very grateful to have you here, and add anything that you'd like to add to that brief intro.
No, that was a great intro, Galen. Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me on your show. But second thing, I really want to thank you for doing what you're doing. This podcast that you're doing is amazing because, you know, us physicians, and I would say in the healthcare profession, industry in general, we need more of people like yourself putting the time, the effort, the honesty to helping guys and girls like us. And so your podcast is amazing. Thank you for doing what you're doing.
Wow, I really appreciate that. That's I'm glad I recorded that. I'll listen to that when I'm feeling like down some days and like get a boost on the old. I appreciate it very much. Thank you. Yeah. So I love. Obviously, you love podcasting. I love podcasting. So really, what I'd love to hear, and I think what people could really benefit from, because you and I have had several conversations about what you're up to, supporting physicians with creating their own pensions, which we are definitely going to talk about. And and your participation in the upcoming conference in June, and you have a big launch date coming up. So we're going to cover all that. And before we do, I'd love to hear more about, what's your journey been as a physician seeking to understand finances? And, I'd love to hear a little bit about what got you down this path of being interested in this topic.
Well, thank you. I got down this path because I was angry at myself. And here's the story. You have no clue how many financial mistakes I've made in my life. So I'm going to share them all with you. Yeah. But it stemmed from, about 6-7 years ago. So I've been in practice for about 23 years. I started when I was very young. I did my training in Montreal, and going through the Quebec system, physicians tend to graduate and become staff very early. So I was staff at a major emergency department in Toronto at the, very young age of 26. I barely knew what, voting was. And so I started working at 26. I came to Toronto. I'm trained in Montreal, and arriving here, I knew nobody. And so I started working, rented an apartment, and, I'm making a first paycheck. So I went down to the bank and I say, hey, now that I'm a physician, now that I'm making some money, what should I do with it? And so the banker, says, hey, we should invest it. You should do this, open a bank account, etc. So I thought, yeah, sure, why not? Help me with that. So did my KYC, and not surprisingly, as a physician, I believe that I'm sort of a conservative type of investor. Mm-hmm. And so my KYC came out as conservative. Vu, why don't you put your money into this type of fund, that type of fund, sign this dotted line here and sign that, and off we go to the races. Mm-hmm. And as someone who, working, when you're a physician and you start working, everything is yes. I want to learn this. I want to do that. I want to learn and absorb as much as I can as a new staff. And so, working a lot, doing a lot of shifts, doing a whole bunch of things. And you don't pay attention. And I didn't pay attention to my finances at all. And I left that rolling for 13 years. Now, for those of you listening to this podcast, oh my God, Vu, you're such an idiot. How could you leave your finances unattended for 13 years? Well, that's what I did, and that's all we knew. Like, I'm not a finance guy. I'm a physician. I work and I treat patients, and that's what I do. So I kind of left it at that for 13 years. And just right after, the crash of 2008, maybe a few years after that, and I'm now married. I've got a kid and bought a new house. I'm like, I wonder how I'm doing with my investments. So I went back to the banker, which, I've kept really good relationship with, because I go to the bank often, deposit, withdraw, etc., say hello from time to time, but never really checked on my investments. And so I met with him, said, hey, how did I do? And keep in mind, this is not too long after 2008, the big crash. And he goes, well, you know what? Very good, Vu. Since inception, you made 1.5%.
Oh.
Oh, exactly. He said, that was very good. I'm like, are you kidding me? Like 1.5% in 13 years? And my jaw dropped. And I was so angry, not at the manager, like at myself. I'm like, Vu, what did you do for 13 years? How could you do this to yourself? Why did you not pay attention? It's like driving a car and not knowing exactly where you're heading and where you're going. And my kids tell me that all the time. Dad, where are we going? I'm like, oh, I don't know why I turned left. Right. And I felt so embarrassed. So embarrassed. And I walked out of there and I said, no more. So I started on a journey of learning. And this is even after I did my MBA. Like, I did my MBA in 2008 and I had an MBA, and I felt so stupid. I felt so embarrassed. Like, how is it that some guy like myself, who has an MBA, has an MD, and not know any of this? So I started to say to myself, enough is enough. So I started on a journey of learning. So bought a whole bunch of finance book. First few books that I bought was from Larry Bates, Beat the Bank. I'm like, I was blown away. I was, wow, fees, MERs, what is that? And then I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. And that was like, oh my God, that's how you define an asset? I never knew what an asset was, but the way he looked at asset was also very different from the rest of the world. Yeah. And then I read other books for, finance for physicians. And I read a lot of books on insurance and read a lot of books on all sorts of topics, real estate, finance, even retirement. I read these books from Frank Vertees, who's the former actuary from Morneau Chappelle, and talking about retirement. I'm like, oh, this is interesting. I need to retire at some point. Let's read that. So in reading all those books, and I had my own accountant and I had financial advisors as well. So was partnered up with a financial advisor, just bugging him, on a regular basis. What about this? What does this mean? What does that mean? Why would you do this? Why wouldn't you do that? And so spend 6-7 years learning about all that. And during my journey, I'm like, wait a minute. Am I the only one who's so stupid and not know this? And I started chatting with my colleagues, and my colleagues, every time I talked to them about, personal finance stuff, the only thing they would say to me is, well, I invested in this, invested in that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, what about the other aspect of finance? What about tax? What about estate? What about risk mitigation? Like, what are you talking about? Oh, by the way, my Tesla stock went up. Okay. That's when I realized that most of us, when we talk about finance, we only talk about investments. We don't talk about anything else. And you're a CFP, and when you talk to us, you don't talk about investments. You talk to us about proper building foundation, proper risk mitigation, proper tax planning, proper estate planning, how to do wills. You talk to us about that, and that's your job.
Yeah, corporate structures, how to use the corporation, like all those things. Yeah, and I mean, exactly. I do. Yeah, and I mean, you've definitely said a lot of great things there. Like, first off, thank you for sharing that journey of like, I mean, you heard me. I couldn't help but make that grunt when I heard 1.3% over 13 years. I mean, there's no real period in the history of the market where, I mean, I get it. They did their job. You did your KYC. It came out. It spit out an answer. You put your money in this thing that's supposed to match what you said and all that. But I mean, yeah, that definitely, yeah. I mean, I get that how that could sting. And then going on that journey of discovery. And I mean, it seems to me like you came to a conclusion that's quite, like unique to a certain extent, is that yeah, like I have people who said, "Oh, Galen, I don't need to work with you. I have my MBA." And I'm like, "You think people with MBAs don't use financial planners?" I was like, or you like, I have clients who are accountants, like I have clients who are lawyers, I have clients who are doctors, I have clients who have MBAs, PhDs, like you name it. Like, so it's, someone can have an MBA and not understand personal finance, like that's for sure. And so, and accountants, some accountants, may not have a whole lot, like they have good tax grasp, but maybe not finance. So you went on the journey of discovery, and I think that's fantastic. And then now what I sense is you, and like, yeah, that final thing that you discovered is like when people talk finance, it's usually, oh, I'm good because my Tesla stock went up, or I'm good because this one thing happened that was positive, or something like that. And a lot of people just stay there forever. Like, I can find out pretty quickly in a conversation with someone if they're probably going to be stuck in that mode forever of, yeah, I've picked some good stocks and I think I'm going to be okay.
That's exactly it. And that's because it comes of a place of ignorance. Ignorance, not because we want to, it's because that's how we were trained, right? I tell people all the time, and that's why I have my podcast, because I'm on a journey of now teaching. And I tell people all the time, if we knew finance the way you know finance, we wouldn't be doctors. We would be CFPs, right? The fact that we are doctors is because we focus our entire life energy on trying to heal people. And we're good at that. Doctors in Canada and US are really good at caring for people.
Yeah.
But we're not really good at finance. And investment is such a small part of finance. But when you talk to colleagues and they say, well, it's always about investment, which is the wrong thing.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, really, for sure. And, what you said earlier was like, you mentioned, you said you felt kind of stupid. Like, how could I have been so stupid? I have an MBA, I have an MD. Like, how could I have made these mistakes? And the sense that I get, and Dr. Wing Lim and I just talked a little bit about this, which is like, I think it's really hard. And so I'll use my own example. I graduated from university. I felt very smart. I just studied like theoretical physics and math and all the like philosophy, all these crazy things. I moved to Venezuela where I barely spoke the language, and little kids would laugh at me when I opened my mouth because I didn't know how to speak proper Spanish. And so I went from feeling really smart to really dumb really fast because I couldn't even express myself. And I remember that sensation of feeling really dumb and like going from that drop, right? And so I think it's really hard for people who are highly educated and highly specialized and very smart and confident in one arena of life, like to an extreme. Like I feel like physicians get to a point where they're extremely knowledgeable in one area. I think it can be really difficult to then look at another area like finance and think, oh, maybe I don't know everything, and risk feeling like they look stupid admitting that they don't know certain things or opening themselves up to the possibility that they don't understand something. So, I mean, that's my theory of like having worked with a lot of people and like knowledgeable people, but I don't know if you've seen that or have a sense of that as well.
Every day I see that every day. Medicine, I don't know about the other industry, but medicine is a very humbling industry. I've been practicing for 23 years of emergency medicine, and I think I've seen it all. I have seen nothing. Nothing. I think I have the right diagnosis. I'm wrong 50% of the time. Like this is the type of profession that I'm in, frontline medicine. I'm not talking about second, third line medicine. Frontline medicine, we make our diagnosis based on good history, good physical, and then we chase it down with certain tests. But if we have a language barrier, if I'm not paying attention, if the patient has a misunderstanding, and we could all speak English and understand different things, right? And so if my history and physical has a certain sensitivity and specificity, and I'm now making a diagnosis, depending on how good I was that day, I could make a wrong diagnosis. Yeah. And so I'm humbled every single day where I think I got the right diagnosis and I don't, right? Someone's going to prove me wrong. Some scan's going to say, no, Dr. Tran, you're wrong again, right? And I get that every single day because it's such a humbling profession. But sometimes we don't act that way and we forget that, especially when we're at top of our game. For example, we've been doing this for so many years. I think I know it all, or I operate on brains. Like how can you be at the top of someone who operates on brain? Or how can you be at the top of someone who operates on a heart? You're like gods of gods, right? And it's really hard for people to think that, yeah, you may be a god of God in operating a brain or heart. But But when it comes to personal finance, you're probably a little baby, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I learned that the hard way, right?
Mm-hmm.
I learned that the hard way. And same, I have an MBA, but MBA teaches you nothing
Yeah.
about personal finance.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I mean, this is really amazing. Yeah, I hear what you're saying around that, like that humility of approaching medicine. Certainly, like you're saying, the front line of doing your best with the information at hand, and then being proven wrong or right consistently. And then one of the things that I'm interested in knowing is that there's certainly a lot of information out there, right? There's your podcast. There's many. I feel like there's a lot of there's a rise, I think, in great Canadian financial podcasts, specifically for physicians. Even like a couple of years ago, I remember I was looking and I didn't find that many, and then I feel like they just keep growing. And there's books, and there's seminars, and there's everything. So for a physician who's out there, and so I think you and I may have talked about this before, but I pulled a whole bunch of physicians a while back, and over half of them, Canadian physicians, and over half of them said that they were confused around finances and they didn't know where to start, and they didn't know who to trust, and they didn't know who to listen to. So I feel like it can be really difficult for a physician out there trying to find like good information. Now, you've talked a bit about your journey of like reading books and like discovering, and obviously you have a podcast where you're turning around and teaching people, and you've talked about advisors. So like, do you feel like, is there a signal that would have a physician say, choose between the path of I'm going to really figure out a lot of this myself, or I'm going to find someone who I can trust to guide me? Like, how can someone find that balance of like knowing, which way to go?
That is an amazing question that it has so many answers to it. So here's how when someone approaches me and say, how do I know this is right for me? Okay, well, first of all, there's no one right answer for everyone, but there's a right direction for everyone. I'll give you an example. When I give vaccines and I give immunization for polio, small child, is the polio vaccine good for everyone? Directionally, yes, it should be good for everyone. But is it this little child has XYZ disease, I can't give the polio, or this little child has fever of XYZ and I can't give it? But directionally, I know the vaccine should be good for almost everyone. And then at that point, that's when I tease out, it's good for patient A, but not good for patient B. But directionally, I know it's good, right? So I find finance the exact same way. When we talk about, risk mitigation and insurances, should people have insurance? Of course they should. Right? Should people have life insurance? Of course they should. Should people have term insurance? Of course they should. Should people have whole life insurance? Of course they should. But what makes term better for patient A versus what makes whole life better for person B? Well, that's where the nuance is. But if you say in general, should people have life insurance? Absolutely, they should. Right? And so that's how I counsel people about it. And the other thing that I counsel people about, it doesn't matter what I say. At the end of the day, does it apply to you?
Yeah.
And how do you know it applies to me when you know nothing? Well, first of all, you need to know a little bit, right? Get some basics down. And I tell people all the time, personal finance is not magic. It's not even as complicated as family medicine.
No.
Right? It's definitely not complicated as open heart surgery. What people need to understand is, what is the power compounding? How do you understand compounding? What is time horizon? What is time value of money? What is risk capacity? What is risk tolerance? What is opportunity cost? Like, those are basic concepts that doesn't need a neurosurgeon, right, to understand. So once you understand those basic principles, and someone like yourself or myself says, Vu, you need a whole life insurance policy because of XYZ reason. Well, if you have a basic understanding of risk mitigation, a basic understanding of power of compounding, basic understanding of opportunity costs, and you look at the proposal in front of you and you put all that together and say, yeah, it makes sense. Or no, this is not for me at this point in my life, because you understood the other principles. And so, and that's where the difficulty is that we don't even have those basic knowledge. So when someone comes to me and say, hey, Vu, you need to have whole life policy, I'll look at them with two big eyes and say, you're trying to sell me some, snake oil. But you're not. You're trying to sell me something good and well, but because I don't have the basic understanding, I'm now skeptic. What are you trying to sell me? but that's because it comes from a place of my own ignorance. And so the first thing is get some basic knowledge in personal finance. And I tell people all the time, people say, yeah, I have an advisor, I have an accountant, I have XYZ, I have a financial plan. Like, no. The same way when I see a patient with diabetes and I say, hey, Mr. Jones, you should take XYZ pills. It is so much better and so much better for the patient when the patient has a basic understanding of why. What's the diabetes? What's the end game here, right? Diabetes is not going to go away. It's going to stay with you forever. But here are the things you can do to prevent XYZ stuff. And if the patient understands and has that basic knowledge, then they'll say, yeah, I understand why metformin. I understand why the insulin. I understand why I need to keep my cholesterol in check. Whereas when I tell that to someone who's not educated about that, I'll constantly fight and constantly have to explain to them why I'm selling that metformin to them, right?
Yeah.
And so same idea for finance. When an advisor comes to me and say, you need XYZ product or service, as a consumer, if I have that basic understanding, I'm more likely to understand and also evaluate, right? I should evaluate as well, right? Dr. Tran says I should have a metformin. Wait a minute. Does it make sense based on what I understand, right? And if I have a personal understanding of finance and you're proposing XYZ stuff, does it make sense based on what I already have basic knowledge about? And so when you give the financial advisor or the investor or portfolio manager, when you give him complete control, then you've lost control. You've lost control. And don't be angry 13 years later when you're making 1.5%.
No.
Don't be angry at the manager. Be angry at yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm hearing like certainly having that foundational understanding. And you mentioned some really great key concepts there. So it's like worth, anyone who doesn't understand some of the quick ones you threw out there, rewind and re-listen and look them up and figure it out. Like you said, the power of compounding and, time horizon and, risk management and all those things. And yeah, definitely. It is, exactly like you said, like if someone doesn't understand the why or the benefit or how am I going to be better off doing this versus that? Like in what way will it impact me? Certainly people probably aren't going to think it's necessarily a good idea. Like, oh, it sounds like something that you want me to do. And certainly, like I talked to a physician not too long ago and he was looking for an advisor and we ended up working together. And he said part of what he didn't like is what he saw out there was he'd hear people say, advisors say things like, I target physicians or I target this or I target that. And he's like, I don't want to be anybody's target. He's like, I feel like I'm targeted enough already. My dad's a physician. He's retired. He still gets cold calls of people trying to sell him like stocks or like tax investments. Like, hey, you need to invest in the oil sands of Texas or whatever they call him and tell him to do. And he's like 75 and retired, and he still gets these phone calls. So I'm like, I get it. Like I get that sense of like, and so I really love that, like that idea of having enough knowledge to be able to at least sift through what people are bringing to the table to be able to say like, like you said, like the directions are all fairly similar for everyone. Like, should everyone protect their income? Yes. Should everyone protect their estate? Yes. The nuance or exactly how they do it is down, of course, to the individual situation. So I really like that. So definitely there's one thing I want to talk about, and we're really getting into that topic of finance, is I know that you've been on a mission to help physicians have more peace of mind around their finances, especially in retirement. So I'd love to hear more about the project you're working on, the launch date you've got coming up, like exactly what you've put together around physicians and retirement.
Yeah, so we're talking about two things. I'm going to talk about the quicker thing first. Sure. The launch date for June 27th is the launch date for my quote unquote masterclass. So I'm putting it out there for people who can't sit for too long and listening to an entire workshop or entire lesson of my 7 years of knowledge all group into my head about to explode. And I can't make people sit through all that, right? So I've developed a masterclass where I do bite size. First hour, we'll do some didactic teaching interaction. And then the second hour, it's all about Q&A. How do I fit to this? Why does it why does it do this, etc. And so I pick specific topics, and there's like maybe 16 or 17 topics, and I do it on Zoom, and it's Monday evening every 2 weeks, and it's a small fee, and they can sit with their wine and we start chatting. So that's That's the master class starting in June. The other one launched December 2021. So we've been launched for 5 months, and it's called the Canadian Physicians Pension Plan. Here's why it was done. So, as I talked about my journey, of 13 years, 1.5%, I'm like, I lost 13 years of compounding. I've lost 13 years of my youth. I've lost 13 years of just paying cost and opportunity, right? And I felt like I was working, chasing after the next paycheck because I had bills to pay. I had a new kid, and I'm figuring out, how I'm going to pay my bills, pay my mortgage, and also have enough money to put my kid through university. Right? Forget about medicine, just put him through university. And I was thinking about all that, and at the same time chasing after the next paycheck. And I never felt financially secured. Never felt financial. And I'm not a low income earner. I'm a high income earner. And yet I still feel this way. Why is that? Right? And why am I the only healthcare professional that works with the government that does not have a pension? Like, help me answer that one, right? Nurses get a good pension, yeah. Physiotherapists who work in a hospital gets a great pension, right? The secretary gets a great pension. The municipal workers get a great pension. Police get a great pension. Firemen get a great pension. But I work for the government too. How come I don't have a pension? And that always bugged me. And that led to the thought that if we are able to provide physicians a stable, organized, structured way of planning their retirement, and it's set and it's structured and it's safe, that they don't have to constantly run after that next paycheck. Does it mean we won't work hard? Of course not. We will still continue to work hard, but we at least know there's a safety net. People will say to me, yeah, we have a safety net. It's called the RRSP. Of course there is. But the RRSP was never meant for high income earners. The RSP was meant for middle income earners. In fact, it was never meant for low income earners either. And so if the RSP is not meant for people like myself and my colleagues, then what is? So we have a product that is suboptimal for my retirement. And yet I look at my nursing colleagues and they're like, oh, they have a great pension. And how come I don't have one?
Yeah.
And having that constant financial stress makes me do a few things, and people don't recognize it. It makes you work double, triple harder just for that next paycheck, right? And when you do that, you work more, faster, longer, harder. And what ends up happening is that now at some point you burn out because you're constantly chasing after that next paycheck. So you burn out. And so a lot of people talk about burnout, and we say, well, it's because of the government. It's because of interest rate. It's because of the EMR system in my hospital. It's because of the CEO. No, I have no control over none of that. I have no control over who gets hired as my CEO. I have no control over what EMR my hospital uses. I have no control over what Justin Trudeau wants to raise or lower taxes. I have no control over what the market does.
Yep.
So what do I have control over? Well, I have control over my spending, so I can try to manage that. And I have control over my taxes. The best thing I learned from that book from Larry Page, which is a great book, is his formula: wealth destroyer and wealth builder. And in the wealth destroyer, the biggest, most important wealth destroyer are taxes.
Yeah.
And if you can manage your taxes properly and you can manage your spending properly, you're set, you're golden. There's really nothing else to talk about. I can work the way I want to work, the hours I want to work, as long as I manage those two things properly. But if we don't manage those two things properly, I'm constantly running after the hamster treadmill.
Yeah.
And so in thinking about that, I'm like, well, the only way out is to give people financial security and financial safety net. And that comes through the form of a pension.
Absolutely, man. So many things, so many great things to talk about there. exactly like you're saying, like, why don't you have a pension? And the RSP was not designed for high income earners. And once you throw a corporation into the mix, like all the different options you have, like it's a completely different ballgame. Like I always say to people, like any book on finance that's geared towards, people that aren't in your situation, a lot of times you really have to be careful. Like once you throw a corporation into the mix, it changes so many different things. Now, the other thing you said around taxes, I really love, because I have the same exact philosophy where I say we manage what we can't control and then we control what we can control. Like the markets we can't control, so we manage our emotions about the markets. That's my biggest role to play in the lives of my clients, is to make sure that they don't panic, that they're set up properly. I don't pretend that there aren't other crashes coming, even right after one has happened. I'm like, great, you're going to experience a few more. There's no doubt about it. Let's make sure you don't panic. And then the tax side of things, like it is fascinating. Like when I do plans for people, how much we can influence the taxation of things. And I'll just get like one very brief example. And I know this is a slightly controversial one, but like when someone's incorporated and in a big hurry to pay off their debt, like I show them, and it's always up to the individual. I say, look, if your debt is keeping you up at night and it's ruining your style, your quality of life, do what you got to do. But people have to be cognizant of the effect of taking $1 out of one's corporation to then put into what is still low interest debt. Like you lose so much of that dollar to taxes. And when people accelerate it, like I've run the scenarios for people, like when they're paying it off aggressively, the impact that has in their long-term wealth can be ridiculously high. So anyways, like I said, people want to pay off their debt, and I know doctors can sometimes be very debt averse, but they have to be aware of that decision. And like just as an example, like I take that dollar and I pay off debt, or do I take off that dollar and I put it towards something like you guys are creating to help physicians create their own pensions? It's a completely different impact that it's going to have.
It's emotional, right? I've been taught by my mom, my dad, my cousin, my next door's dog, that I always have to pay down debt, right? You listen to Dave Ramsey, cut the credit card, pay down your debt as aggressively as possible. But hold on, Dave Ramsey's not talking about me and you. They're talking about the guy who's struggling in the US making 30 grand a year. They're not talking about the neurosurgeon in Canada. But yet we take that philosophy and we say we run with it and we think that's the truth. And so it's emotional. And if people understood, right? If people understood compounding and the power of compounding, what you just said there, instead of taking $1 and pay down a low interest debt of 2%, but instead taking that same dollar and put it into the market or into whatever, a GIC, even if it makes 2%, right? Even if it makes 5%, I'm going to put it into something that has an interest rate of 2%, but I'm going to forego a GIC of 3% where I could make 1% compounded for the next year, 40 years. If people understood that, they'll say, why am I paying down debt so aggressively? Yeah. It's because people don't understand the very basic principles of compounding, right? And they don't understand opportunity cost. And there's another one that people don't understand. I'm going to say it on the air, but people will probably shoot me. OPM, right? Other people's money, right? And so what is other people's money? It's leverage. When people understand leverage when they buy a house. Oh, I got a mortgage, right? They put 20% down to have 100% of a house. They mortgage 5 times, right? They leverage 5 times. People understand that. Yeah. But when you tell them, hey, you should do the same, but in reverse. Instead of paying the bank, you use the bank's money to now invest in. Oh no, I can't do that because I can't sleep. But hold on, you just leverage 5 times to buy your house, and yet you can't sleep. So people don't understand those basic science principles, right? And that's the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and definitely, I know that we've definitely talked about a few of these topics before, and it's a big one for sure. I mean, any dollar you take out of your corporation, you have to have a pretty good reason to do so. And so, I mean, I'd love to talk about corporations, talk about retirement, talk about pensions. It's top of mind. In that same survey where I surveyed a whole bunch of Canadian physicians, I asked a question: if you had a magic wand, what would you do for your finances? And one of the most common answers was pension. And like even my own dad, when I was growing up, someone once asked me, "What does your dad do?" And I said, he's in construction, and he's a nephrologist. And my dad looked at me. He's like, "Why did you say I'm in construction? I'm a doctor." And I said, "Well, every day after school, We get into our car. You drive us to the stinky old building. We have to put on hard hats. You tell these guys to do all these different things. And he's like, no, that's an income property that I'm renovating. And that's going to be like what I use in retirement. And at the time I was like 6 years old, so I didn't quite get it. But when I grew up, I got it. I was like, oh, my dad, who has zero pension, zero safety net, is trying to create a pension through property. Other people are creating it through investments, whatever you've picked. At the end of the day, what people want is they want a cash flow in retirement. Like I have very few clients who have pensions. I don't really end up working with people with pensions, but I have a few retired teacher clients, and like they don't really care how much money they have in the bank. Like, they care because they've saved some and they don't want to see it disappear, but like their paycheck is coming every month. Like they're not that worried when the markets drop. They're like, our paycheck is still coming. So that's really what I love what you're up to with helping physicians with their pensions. So I'd love to, whatever you can share on that and like the journey of that and what you're creating, I think would be really great for people to know about.
I'll share one thing. I'll share one thing with the audience about the pension. So I created my own pension, and it took me some time to create it. And when I finally got that letter from CRA with the stamp of approval on it that says, Dr. Tran, MPC, you have a registered pension. You have no clue, like the burden, the emotional burden just lifted off my shoulders. It was so powerful. I was ecstatic. And like you said, like if you have a good safety net, you're not so much hitting the home runs. You're not so much looking for that extra return. You're happy with, meager 5%, 2%.
Yeah.
Because you have money coming in regardless. Don't underestimate the emotional outcome of that. It is so powerful.
Yeah. And that's it. Like I read somewhere where it said it was a financial advisor author out of the States who I love. His name's Nick Murray. And at some point he said, people care less about what's in the bank. They care more about what's in their bank account. Like they care less about what's in their investments and more about what they're getting in income, because whatever people are saving, if it doesn't translate into peace of mind through steady income in retirement, then it's not doing what it's supposed to do. And I've met people who are sitting on millions of dollars who are stressed in retirement because they're worried. They're like, what's going to happen? Do I have enough? Do I not have enough? Like, they're not my clients. They're people I've met because they haven't answered those big questions. But like, if they had a steady income, then they wouldn't have to be so concerned. Just like you said, you don't have to aim for those home runs if you've got this safety net. So it's a really incredible thing to have. That's for sure.
Absolutely. And we've made it available to all Canadian physicians who are incorporated. And the reason it has to be incorporated, because you need to have an employer-employee relationship, right? To have a pension. And I would say 90% of physicians across Canada are self-employed and they're contracted to the ministry, right? I get paid by OHIP, but I'm not an employee of OHIP. I'm contracted to OHIP. Or to any provincial payer. So I don't have that relationship there with the ministry, but I do have that employer-employee relationship with my corporation. And so to have a pension, you must be incorporated. And a lot of my colleagues are not incorporated still. To this day, they're not. And I'm like, why? What are you waiting for? Right? Obviously, as I said, directionally, I think all physicians should incorporate directionally. Right. But are there some cases where people shouldn't incorporate? I guess so. There has to be, right? Everybody has their own circumstances. Yeah. But directionally, I think all physicians should incorporate.
Yeah, it's pretty rare to meet a physician that shouldn't incorporate. Like,
yeah, very rare, right?
Yeah, that shouldn't. I that's interesting that so many haven't, because all the ones that I end up working with incorporate. If they haven't already, I usually show them the value of incorporating. But yeah, like it would be a pretty rare case, I think.
Yeah, and it's rare, like I said, but there are always some, specific circumstances. Sure. And the funny thing is, those who are not incorporated will always tell me why they aren't. Right?
Sure.
And incorporation is just step number one. Like, it's the basic step. After that, you create a pension. Yeah. After that, you buy life insurance.
Yeah.
After that, you create your RCA, retirement compensation arrangement. Now, I just said a word that's called RCA. It's not the television. It's RCA, right? It's retirement compensation arrangement. I guarantee you 99% of your audience, maybe even 100%, have no clue what I just said.
Oh, yeah.
Because it's not something that is talked about, but it's, I think, the best kept secret in the tax law.
Oh yeah, like I didn't even know about RCA until not even that long ago. Like I'd say, so I've been an advisor for 9 years. I think I finally heard about the RCA maybe in my like sixth year of practice, fifth maybe. And then when I did my CFP, of course, it was there in the book. But oh yeah, like it's a very uncommonly known strategy for sure.
Right. It's a very powerful strategy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's great. And so where can people find more? Like where should people, I want to make sure before we end that people have heard everything they should be hearing. I know it's not as you said, you could talk for many multiple hours about everything, obviously, and that's why you've created the masterclass. That what's the best way for people to find out more about the physician pensions plan, find out more about your masterclass? Like what are some of the best ways to make sure people find those?
Well, thank you. So for the pension is Canadian Physicians with an S, pensionplan.ca. And on that website, there's a lot of good information and there's a contact button. You click on that contact, fill in your email, and then we contact you. And then to contact me personally for the masterclass or other questions, I'm happy to speak to people. This is something that people tell me all the time. I can't stop talking. So if you reach out to me, I'll speak with you for sure. And it's HMFHD, which stands for How is My Financial Health Doc? So HMFHD 2020, because that's when it was launched, at gmail.com. So HMFHD 2020 at gmail.com.
Perfect. No, thank you for that. And then I think what we should end on is, I mean, we didn't have a ton of time to talk about it, but if you could briefly touch on, I know that you've been invited as a guest speaker for the Physician Empowerment Conference coming up June 4th and 5th, 3rd, 4th, and 5th, and you're actually giving 2 talks, right, at that conference. And so what are the topics that you're going to touch on at that conference?
Absolutely. So the first one is about, there's no more need for pension envy. which is the topic of pensions. So physicians never had pensions in Canada, but that's long forgotten because we launched a pension for doctors in Canada December 2021, which is the Canadian Physicians Pension Plan. So I'm not going to be talking about that in particular, but I'm going to talk about, the comparison between pensions and RSP, the tax benefits of pension, the drawbacks of RSP, and why we should do it early than later, right? So that's the pension. The second topic is about the link between financial illiteracy and burnout, which we've talked about a little bit. There's another book that I suggest people read, and it's called My Life or My Money from Vicki Robbins. And essentially boils down to this concept. The concept is that we exchange our life energy for a paycheck. Unlike a manufacturing plant, I don't produce a car, I don't produce a widget, I don't sell on Amazon while I'm asleep. As a physician, I make a paycheck. I earn an income when I'm present. When I'm seeing a patient, when I'm touching a patient, when I'm caring for a patient, and all that takes my time. And my time is what? My time is my life energy. And when I dedicate that time, then I get in a paycheck in return. And so that time of mine is my life energy. I'm like a battery because when you buy a Duracell or Energizer, there's 10,000 hours. And then you spend those 10,000 hours of energy and the battery's done. Well, what about physicians? Well, physicians have a certain amount of life energy. May call it 50 years, call it 80 years, call it 20 years. We don't know when we're going to die. We know we're going to die. We just don't know when. And so we spend our life chasing after a paycheck, exchanging our life energy for a paycheck. And if we do that and we're not careful with the paycheck, or worse, we don't even know what to do with the paycheck because we spend it all, or we're not paying attention to our taxes because we don't have that financial literacy, then that's where the burnout comes in, because we are expending so much of our life energy without properly understanding how not understanding finance contributes to that. And so that's the whole topic of financial literacy and burnout.
Yeah. And I mean, what I really find fascinating, those are two amazing topics, and they're also very closely linked. Like, one of the things I compare is when people are not creating their own pension versus people who are creating their own pension. It's just like you said, like I think of it as when you go to work, you're like mining, and you're mining for bricks, and you take those bricks and you build your life. Like, okay, I made some bricks this year. I'm going to take some of those bricks, and I'm going to buy a car. I'm going to go build my life with a car, or, and then eventually the idea is you save enough money, like the traditional way is you save enough bricks to then be able to take from that pile of bricks to create your life in retirement. But when you create a pension, in my opinion, you're creating a brick factory. Like, you haven't just created a pile of bricks that then you're going to start grabbing from. You've actually created a factory that's going to generate bricks over and over. And we're not going to go into too many of the details, but the thing that's better about that than the traditional way, which includes RSPs, the better way of creating your own pension is that brick factory, your kids can actually inherit that brick factory in a way that's much more seamless than the pile of bricks, the traditional way. So that's one of the things I look at. Like, one of the analogies I've come up with over time is like, it's a complete shift, because the people who all they think about is, I have a pile of bricks and I better not run out of bricks, they're stressed. The people who have a brick factory, they're not nearly as stressed, because they're like, that thing is pumping out bricks every year. And the bonus is they don't lose half the bricks when they die. They actually get to give some to their family. So yeah, it's a win-win-win.
Absolutely. And it's a great analogy. And you talk about, the bricks, the pile of bricks, and lose half of it. People don't understand that our biggest tax bill is at time of death. Or maybe the day after.
Yeah.
So the day after, my estate, my family, my children has to pay my debt.
Mm-hmm.
And my debt, the biggest debtor is the government. We have to pay our taxes at the end of our life, and we only pay it after our death. So in deemed disposition, when we have the RSPs, half, and if not half, is gone. Whereas in a pension, it's not. And so there's a huge difference between leaving $10 million versus leaving $5 million versus, leaving $2 million versus leaving $1 million, right? Huge difference. And when you think about it, if I have $10 million to leave behind versus leave behind $5 million, I now have to make up the other $5 million with my work.
Yeah.
Which means I have to work harder to keep that 10 million, because I have to make 20 million to keep the 10 million. Imagine the amount of burnout that would cause.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, absolutely. Right? And people are shocked. Like, every time I give an estate planning talk, I show how much. I said, if you die with this much in your RSPs, and I just use different numbers, like 100, 200, $500,000, $1 million, $2 million, how much is going to go to taxes? And every time I give that talk, people come up to me afterwards and they say, I don't believe you. they say, how come the person I've been with for 20 years never told me this? And I'm like, I don't know. Like, I don't know why maybe they don't know what to do about it. Maybe they just think this is the way it has to be. And so, I think I had someone day before yesterday. They said, no, I heard of some way where you can name beneficiaries and da da da. I was like, no. I was like, once it crosses that generational line, like from a parent to child, like that's it. Like, I always say to people, you would never voluntarily sell everything you own, much less on the same year, but in the same day. But when we die, that's exactly what's considered to have been happened, is we sell every single thing that belongs to us all at once. So just imagine the tax bill that would create if someone has a cottage and a business. And anyways, I could go on and on, but people are so unaware of that impact. And I get it when people are young and getting started, and it's like, okay, maybe that doesn't matter, but like, that's part of the job, is to look 30, 40 years into the future, 70 years into the future, and say, like, what could your kids or grandkids do with an extra $1, $2, $3, $5 million? What kind of impact could that have on their lives, or your favorite charity, like whoever you want? Like, the planning we do basically diverts the money from the CRA towards the people and the things we care about. And so, and it's all above board. We're not cheating. It's just that with proper planning, you can actually actively do that. So, right. Because I obviously get worked up about the estate planning side of things.
No, it's easy to understand, right? Now, it's easy to understand, but people don't get it when it comes out of your mouth or my mouth, right? But we do this all the time. As a physician, we tell people, eat healthy, exercise, drink this so that we can prevent your heart attack or your stroke 30 years down the line, right? And it's easy for physicians to understand that. Stop smoking, you'll have lung cancer. Yeah. Well, you don't have lung cancer now, you have lung cancer in 30 years. So we tell people to do those type of things to prevent that type of disease 30 years from now.
Sure.
But when you tell them, you need to save this way to prevent your financial stroke, They're like, what? No, I don't believe you.
That's well, yeah. And the other thing I joke about is that's future me's problem. Like, you know what? Like there's this whole thing, and we won't go into it because we're running out of time. But like the psychology of the future self versus the present self, and like the future self, forget about that guy. That guy's gonna have to take care of himself. Like maybe he's gonna have diabetes and be overweight, but like today I'm gonna do what I want to do. And the same thing with finances. It's like that's future me's problem. But I mean, obviously, some people do take a look at things and say, oh, I get the impact of these decisions. Let's see if there's a way that we can shift things, still get what I want now, but then also get what I want later. So
Right.
it's awesome. But yeah,
Right.
so I mean, thank you so much for being on. Definitely everyone go to the website, CanadianPhysiciansPensionPlan.ca. Check that out. It's a great website. It's got all sorts of, it's very easy to understand. I love the way that you've built that website. It's very simple. Like I'm always big on simple, very simple to understand what you're up to. And you like you said, you've got the contact me button there for people to find out more. And then for people to contact you about the masterclass, hmfhd2020@gmail.com. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you very much for having me. And again, Galen, thank you for all the work that you do on behalf of our industry and to help our industry. So thank you. Thank you for what you do.
Oh, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thanks so much for having joined me on this episode of the Clean Bill of Wealth podcast. I truly appreciate you taking the time to do so. It really warms my heart to see the numbers of people listen to each episode go up. It's just a lot of fun. Feel free to scroll through the other episodes. I've interviewed a lot of really amazing people and just want to get their insights out there to Canadian physicians. If you're left wondering anything about your financial plan, whether you're making the most of your corporation, are you on track for retirement, are there more efficiencies you could be finding, feel free to head on over to galenhelpsdocs.com. That's GALEN helpsdocs.com. You can read more about the work I do, my offer of fee-based planning, which is pretty popular among medical professionals, where you pay for a plan, you don't have to buy a product. Go over there, click a button, book a free call. We'll have a quick conversation and see if you're a good fit for the fee-based services. All right, thanks so much for joining me. Take care.